November 12, 1943. Odo 2 Station hours, the North Atlantic. The air inside U-537 is thick with diesel fumes, unwashed bodies, and terror. Oberbootsman Karl Hoffmann grips a valve wheel. The destroyer's sonar pings grow louder, closer, until the first depth charge detonates like the fist of God, slamming the hull sideways. Lights shatter, cork insulation rains down, water sprays from a ruptured pipe. They are dying in a steel coffin 200 meters below the surface. Then comes the order, surface, blow all tanks, abandon ship. Karl scrambles onto the deck, gasping in the freezing Atlantic air, and sees the searchlight of HMCS Saguenay pinning them like insects. A Canadian voice booms through a bullhorn, "Do not attempt to scuttle, abandon your vessel." Karl slides into the black water, is hauled aboard the destroyer, and a sailor built like a lumberjack shoves a rough wool blanket into his chest. There is no rifle butt to the face, no spit, no triumphant kick, just businesslike efficiency. And in that moment Karl realizes he has entered a war he does not understand. Days later, Karl and the surviving crew are landed at Halifax, Nova Scotia. The port is crowded with warships, supply convoys, and thousands of prisoners in Wehrmacht Gray in Africa, Corps Tan. Veterans Guard soldiers process them, elderly, pipe-smoking Great War veterans whose calm authority unsettles the Germans more than force ever could. A Wehrmacht captain demands authority. Sergeant Frank McBride, gray and unhurried, silences him with polite firmness. The words cut deeper than shouting. The Germans realize these men do not fear them. Discipline here is quiet, absolute, and indifferent to rank or bluster. They expect cattle cars, but board old passenger coaches instead. Wooden benches, a stove, windows. Rations are handed out, cigarettes too. The train pulls away. Cities vanish quickly. Trees replace buildings. Hours pass, then more hours. By sunset, forest stretches endlessly in every direction. The journey continues for days. Nova Scotia fades into New Brunswick, then Quebec. Discipline attempts falter. Silence grows heavy. Ontario seems impossibly vast. Forest becomes rock, cliffs, and wind-scarred pines. Lakes appear then, more lakes, each larger than the last, like inland seas swallowing the horizon. The emptiness becomes oppressive. Escape feels absurd. In Europe there were borders and towns. Here there is only distance. A young soldier whispers disbelief at a land so empty. Karl knows better. The sun's position never lies. They are still moving west, deeper into something vast and indifferent. Desperate, the captain confronts McBride, invoking the Geneva Convention. McBride calmly unfolds a map. Halifax is a speck. Their progress barely registers. Naze, on Lake Superior's northern shore, is another tiny dot lost in white space. The realization breaks something fundamental inside them. On the fourth day, the train stops. There is no town, only forest, wind, and silence. Camp 100 stands newly cut from the wilderness, wire fences stark against dark trees. Beyond it lies Lake Superior, not a lake, but an ocean of cold gray water stretching endlessly. Major Pelletier welcomes them formally. He explains the rules, the work, the treatment. Then he gestures to the wilderness. The guards are not the real jailers. Rock, water, distance are. Escape means death. Karl sits on his cot later, staring at pine walls, understanding how completely the world has changed. Before we continue, if you're enjoying this story of unexpected mercy and crushing geography, hit like and subscribe so you don't miss dives into forgotten corners of World War II. Drop a comment telling us where you're watching. We love hearing from viewers. The first shock is the food. Gunter weeps openly in the mess hall, staring at his tray. Thick white bread, real butter, jam, eggs, bacon, and dark sweet coffee. It is more than his family has seen in a year. He whispers that it must be mockery, but it is not. They are fed better than they were at the front, better than their families back home. The abundance unsettles them, Brutality would make sense. It fits war. But kindness, routine, and plenty feel like something far more dangerous. It erodes certainty, replaces anger with confusion, and leaves nothing solid to resist. They are issued warm work clothing, wool trousers, flannel shirts, heavy boots, Canadian-made, practical, humane. Major Pelletier explains calmly that officers may refuse labor, but only workers receive full rations, cigarettes, jam, chocolate. The silence answers him. By morning, almost all volunteer. Their work is cutting pulpwood. Each day they leave the wire under the relaxed watch of elderly guards. Rifles hang loose, pipes glow. They are handed axes and cross-cut saws and told to attack the forest. The rhythmic thud of steel echoes. Carl's soft hands blister quickly, then split. Sergeant McBride watches from a stump, cleaning his pipe. Not alert, not cruel, simply present. When Carl loses his axe head in the snow, fear knots his stomach. In the Wehrmacht, this meant punishment. McBride only sighs, helps search, retrieves it, and sends Carl to fix it. That is all. No shouting, no humiliation. McBride jokes and waves him off. The lack of hostility is deeply unsettling. There is nothing to hate, nothing to push against. The guards treat them like difficult laborers, not enemies, dangerous perhaps, but human and vaguely tiresome. Rigid discipline begins to erode. Salutes feel absurd when your guard calls you son and worries more about tobacco than ideology. Slowly, the prisoners build a life. A theater, a sports field, an oven, music, plays, a small, fragile Germany carved into emptiness. But the emptiness remains. One evening, Carl watches the sun burn across Lake Superior, turning ice and water into fire. It is vast beyond comprehension. Germany feels suddenly small. History, borders, people all meaningless here. This land is indifferent, ancient, and complete without them. He imagines escape and knows it means death. The forest would swallow him. The lake would freeze him. He turns toward the guard tower. The old man inside is reading a newspaper, barely looking up. Carl understands then. The wire is not to keep them in, it is to keep the wilderness out. February 9th, 1944. Dawn at Camp 100 Nace. Carl steps outside Hut 27 into a world erased. 42 degrees below zero turns air into something solid and biting. Each breath burns. Snowdrifts rise higher than barracks, carving white corridors through the camp. Lake Superior is frozen into a vast white plate, its pressure ridges groaning and booming as the ice shifts. The sound rolls across the emptiness like distant artillery. It feels alive, immense, and hostile. This is the true jailer ancient, indifferent, and utterly beyond negotiation. Inside the mess hall, warmth fogs the air. Coffee steams, pork sizzles, wool dries. A young Lancer rocks with terror, convinced this cold is deliberate execution. Sergeant McBride calmly corrects him, listing firewood, clothing, and calories with mild practicality, then complains about his own furnace. The guard's casual reassurance deflates the panic completely. There is no menace, no drama, only facts. Eat, work, stay warm. The young soldier stares, undone not by fear, but by the ordinariness of it all. Even here, life continues in practical, manageable pieces. Work continues despite the cold. The prisoners skid logs with draft horses, hauling timber across frozen ground toward the lake. Carl has changed. His hands are hard, his body strong. He finds satisfaction in the labor, the clarity, the silence, the visible proof of effort. The Wehrmacht captain has not adapted. Oberstleutnant Vogel refuses to work, clinging to rank alone. He receives the basic ration. He grows thin, permanently cold, his authority hollow. Canadian rules are polite and absolute. Rank means nothing without usefulness here. One morning, Vogel reprimands Carl out of habit. Carl calmly tells him to move. He is blocking the harness. No salute, no deference. Vogel freezes, shocked. He has no punishment to offer, no system to enforce. His power has evaporated completely. Ontario winter has destroyed the Wehrmacht hierarchy more thoroughly than battle ever could. Vogel retreats, furious and helpless, to his unheated hut. He is no longer an officer, no longer a leader. He is simply a hungry man in the cold. The war, meanwhile, has become a ghost story. In June 1944, the camp receives newspapers. The headlines are enormous. Invasion. Allies land in Normandy. Karl, Gunther, and the others huddle around the paper in the mess hall. They read the names of French towns they had occupied, now rubble. They see the lists of captured German divisions. There is no cheering, no Heil Hitler, only a profound, heavy silence. "They are dying," Gunther whispers, his face gray. He is staring at a photo of a destroyed panzer near Caen. "All of them, they're all dying." Karl looks out the window, past the wire to the green, indifferent forest, now teeming with summer life. The war is on another planet. The battles, the blood, the furor, it all feels like a faint fever dream. Here, the only enemies are the black flies and mosquitoes. Here, the only objective is to stack the day's quota of wood, to earn the ration, to get a seat at the orchestra's performance of Beethoven. A new batch of prisoners arrives in late 1944. These are not the professionals of 42 and 43. They are hollow-eyed, fanatical boys from the Hitler Youth and old, terrified men from the Volkssturm. They try to impose the Nazi salute. They call Karl and the others traitors for their casual working relationship with the guards. "You are collaborators," one 17-year-old SS Schütze screams at Karl. "You fraternize with the enemy." Karl, who now weighs 20 pounds more than when he was captured, who has muscles he never knew he had, simply looks at the boy. "The enemy," Karl says, "gave me this apple." He takes a bite. "They gave me this wool blanket. The enemy, Junge, is the only reason you will survive the winter." The boy is speechless. His fanaticism has no purchase here. It cannot compete with a full stomach and the crushing, silent, apolitical presence of the Canadian Shield. May 8, 1945, 1100 hours. Camp 100, Nays. The sound of the great unraveling has haunted the camp for weeks, the sound of spring on Lake Superior, a cacophony of pistol-shot cracks, deep groaning booms, and the grinding of continents of ice against the shore. The lake is breaking up. A whistle blows, not for the work detail, full assembly. The prisoners file out onto the muddy parade ground, blinking in the bright, watery sunlight. The smell is of damp earth, thawing pine needles, and vast cold water. Major Pelletier stands on the steps of the main hall, holding a single sheet of paper. The camp falls silent. Even the SS fanatics, the blacks, as they're known, sense the gravity. Pelletier waits, letting the silence stretch, broken only by the drip of water from the eaves. "Gentlemen," he begins, his voice flat, devoid of triumph, "I have an announcement from Allied Supreme Command." He raises the paper. As of 23:01 Central European Time, May 7th, all forces of the German High Command have surrendered unconditionally. The war in Europe is over. The silence that follows is not human. It is the silence of the wilderness itself, a vast, crushing vacuum. Karl stands frozen. He feels the light spring breeze on his face. He hears a single woodpecker hammering at a tree just outside the wire. The war is over. The words don't make sense. The war was the world. It was the axis on which his entire life had turned. Here, in this place, it had become a distant radio signal. Now that signal had been switched off. A single shrill voice shatters the quiet. It is the 17-year-old SS Schütze. His face is a mask of white, fanatical rage, his eyes streaming tears. "Lüge!" he screams, his voice cracking. "Lies! It is a trick! The Führer lives! The Wunderwaffen are coming! You are liars!" He lunges not at a guard, but at Gunther, standing next to him. "Traitor! You believe this?" Before he can take 2 steps, Sergeant McBride, who had been leaning against a post, moves with a speed that belies his age. He doesn't draw his weapon. He simply grabs the boy by the front of his tunic, lifting him half off the ground. McBride's face is inches from the boy's. His voice is not a shout. It is a low, cold growl. "The war," he hisses, "is over. You lost. Your Führer put a bullet in his own head in a bunker. In Berlin, your 1,000-year Reich is a pile of bricks." He shoves the boy who stumbles and falls into the mud, sobbing. McBride looks up at the rest of the prisoners, his eyes sweeping over them. Anyone else? No one moves. Oberstleutnant Vogel stares at his boots, his face hollow. His pride, his rank, his entire purpose, all of it, had been built on a foundation that was now officially gone. He is just a cold, hungry man in a tattered uniform in the middle of a Canadian forest. Pelletier clears his throat. "You are no longer prisoners of war. You are now classified as surrendered enemy personnel. You will remain in this facility pending repatriation." He folds the paper. "The whistle for the midday meal will blow in 10 minutes. Dismissed." And that is it. There is no celebration from the Canadians, no taunting, no triumphant hoisting of a flag. The war did not end with a bang. It ended with a polite announcement followed by the promise of lunch. Carl walks back to Hut 27 in a daze. Günther walks beside him, his shoulders slumped. "It is finished," Günther whispers. He pulls a worn photo from his breast pocket, his wife and 2 small children standing in front of a church in Dresden. Are they still there, Carl? Is Dresden still there? Carl has no answer. He realizes with a cold dread that his own polite, comfortable, well-fed imprisonment has been a grotesque mercy. While he was learning to swing an axe and complaining about the cold, his entire country was being incinerated. The work continues. This, perhaps, is the strangest part. But the war is over, a Fallschirmjäger protests the next morning as the guards hand out the saws. Sergeant McBride sips his tea from a metal mug. "That's right, son." "So why are we cutting wood?" McBride looks at him as if he's an idiot. "Because the contract with the Superior Pulp and Paper Mill doesn't expire until 1946. You're still getting paid, aren't you? You're still eating, aren't you? Well, someone's got to cut the wood. Get to it." Carl shoulders his axe. He walks into the forest, a place that is no longer a prison, but simply his workplace. He is no longer a soldier of the Reich. He is no longer a prisoner of war. He is a lumberjack, a well-fed, well-paid, displaced employee of the Canadian government. He stands before a massive white pine. He spits on his hands, grips the axe handle, and swings. The clean thwack echoes in the silent, indifferent forest. He had been captured by an enemy that confused him. He had been imprisoned by a geography that terrified him. And in the end, he had been defeated not by violence, but by polite, bureaucratic, overwhelming normalcy. The barbed wire, the guards, the war itself, they had all been secondary. The true victor had been this, the vast, silent, apolitical wilderness that stretched from coast to coast, a land so immense and indifferent that it had swallowed an entire army without a single shot fired. Carl swings the axe again. The tree shudders, and somewhere behind him, Sergeant McBride lights his pipe, exhales a plume of smoke into the cold spring air, and watches the Germans work not as enemies, not as monsters, but simply as men who had traveled halfway around the world only to discover that the world was far, far larger than they had ever been told.